My name is Cedric Wins, and you're listening to The Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network.
You're listening to Spotlight, the podcast that fosters connections with veterans and military spouses. Here's your host, Bob Louthan.
Welcome, everybody, to the Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network. This is your host, Bob Louthan. Very pleased today to have as my guest Major General Cedric Wins. He's retired from the United States Army, most recently the Commanding General, U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command, and a VMI graduate. So, Cedric, very good to have you on the program. Welcome.
Great to be here, and thanks, Bob, for having me as one of your guests.
Well, we're going to get into Cedric's youth. Unfortunately, he came to VMI in the fall of 1981, where I happened to be a first classman. I believe my dates are right on that, Cedric. But anyway, right. we can reserve any of those stories for after the podcast. But I always like to start with my guest and let them share a little bit about where they grew up. So, Cedric, tell me a little bit about where you grew up and how you ended up coming to VMI.
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. My roommates, VMI roommates, we used to kid a lot about whether I was actually from D.C. or not. That was kind of a running joke. But I did grow up in the Washington, D.C. area, spent a good bit of time. My father relocated the family when he retired from the military up to Washington, D.C. And so we lived at times in Washington. And then as he was trying to find better locations, better opportunities for the family, we would move around from Washington, D.C. to parts of Maryland.
Was he in the Army?
He certainly was. He was an enlisted man in the Army. His last assignment was at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I was born. And then he retired from the military and then went into the Metropolitan Police Force here up in the District of Columbia and spent some time there before he became a U.S. Marshal. And then he retired from government service, civil service, and started doing property management of a host of property that he had acquired and owned.
Very good. So how'd you end up choosing VMI? I think I know part of the story.
Yeah, so I think it was more like VMI chose me. I had transferred between my junior and senior year from DeMatha High School, which is a well-known school in the district for producing basketball and football players, athletes in general, student athletes, because a lot of folks is a very, very good school academically too. Mm-hmm. But I transferred to public school and played my junior year and my senior year at High Point High School, which is in Beltsville, Maryland. And I think the coaches at the time, Charlie Smiles, Mark Sandy, and I can't think of the other coach's name right now. They had seen me play at the 5-star basketball camp up in Pennsylvania, and so they followed me my senior year. I had big designs and big ideas about going to play for the University of Maryland, but that didn't happen. And so VMI came recruiting me, and they stuck with me throughout my whole senior year, and were continuously letting me know that they were watching me and watching how I was doing my senior year. And then when the time came, they offered me a full 4-year basketball scholarship. And so it was one of my personal goals because I wanted to be the first in my family to have an opportunity to go to college and get a college degree. And so that was going to be my best route by being able to have my college paid for by some means. So that is how I accepted a scholarship to VMI. There's an interesting backstory to it in that early on during my senior season, the Naval Academy actually had come to me and indicated that they wanted me to go to the Naval Academy. And I actually turned them down. And my reasoning for turning them down was that I told them I didn't see myself doing a career in the military.
How about that? Much less maybe in a submarine or something. How tall are you?
I'm about 6'3" at the time.
Uh-huh.
So 6'3". I wasn't the tallest guy and probably could have made it in the sub in cramped surroundings. But yeah, I didn't see myself doing a military career. I thought that I was going to be doing other things. My calling would be to do something else.
How about that? So, we talked about this in a previous conversation. You probably thought you were going to do a few years in the Army and get out. And how long were you in before you retired in December?
34 years.
34
34
years.
years.
Kind of
That's
snuck
right.
up
So
on you, didn't it?
it did. It did. 3 years was my commitment, and the other 31 was all gravy. I always tell people I got more out of it than I probably, or I got at least as much out of it as I gave. Because I was determined that 3 years was going to be all that I served.
What was your primary MOS when you entered and when you commissioned?
I commissioned as a field artillery, and another interesting backstory was for my probably 3 years, maybe 3 years at VMI. I was initially Air Force ROTC.
Okay.
And I remember when you get to your junior year and you start getting the stipend that they pay you, for whatever reason, the Air Force decided that they wanted me to take a full battery of tests. They had seen something in my medical records, and they wanted me to take a full battery of tests. So I started taking all these tests, and for whatever reason, they disqualified me. So I thought that was pretty interesting, being a Division I athlete. In probably peak shape and peak condition. And they said something about I had something that disqualified me from military service in the Air Force. And so I figured, well, I still think I ought to be able to get that $200 a month, I think it was, for being in the ROTC program. So I walked down the hall and I talked to the PMS for the Army. And I said, hey, the Air Force just rejected me. What do you guys say? And they said, oh, shoot, we'll take you in a heartbeat. And so I ended up signing up for Army ROTC.
Back in the day, that was the commandant. So was that Buzzy Snyder that you talked to? Maybe that you got you into the Army, or had he gone on by then? He might have.
He was a commandant.
Yeah.
But one of the TAC officers we had was an artilleryman named Gleason,
Mm-hmm.
and then retired Lieutenant General Colby Broadwater was one of our TAC officers at the time.
My goodness. Okay.
If you remember him, and he left VMI and eventually became a 3-star, I believe.
So where'd you go initially as an artilleryman? And let's walk through some of your favorite experiences in your career, and then we'll talk a little bit about your last job before you retired.
Sure thing. I think the thing that interests me the most about the Army when I first went in, above anything else, was the opportunity to kind of go and see the world, go and experience different places. And so I initially thought that I would go overseas, but something changed my mind. And there were 3 locations that were considered kind of the prime locations in the United States that people like to go and serve. One was Hawaii. The second was Fort Carson, Colorado. And the third place was Fort Ord, California. Mm-hmm. And so I think I picked 2 of those as my top 2 choices, and then I had some others. Well, around that time, the Army was going to the conversion of adding another light infantry division to the 10 or 12 divisions that they had at the time. And so everybody knows about the 82nd Airborne, and eventually there would be the 10th Mountain Division. Well, the 7th Infantry Division was a division that was out in Fort Ord, California, that they were going through the conversion, which would ultimately make them the 7th Infantry light fighters. And so I think there was a big push to get an influx of additional people into Fort Ord to serve in the 7th ID. And so I got picked to go to 7th ID. And so that was my first assignment. And it was quite interesting because from what I'm told, Fort Ord kind of went from this Sleepy Hollow base where a lot of times they did some joint training with the National Guard force that was down in Camp Roberts. So they spent a lot of time in Camp Roberts in Hunter Liggett, California, which is a little further south. And then they became this high-speed HUA division. And I think we spent probably about 270 to 280 days out of the year in the field or on some type of rapid deployment. So fortunately for me, I was single at the time, and I really didn't have anything else to do but go to the field. So that's where I ended up, 7th ID, 6th Battalion, 8th Field Artillery, which was the 7th of ARD.
Good thing about going to the field like that is you come back and you haven't blown through any of your money. So
yes.
and end up buying a thoughtful automobile like a Camaro or something like that. Who knows
exactly
what you might have invested in. So tell me about maybe one of your favorite commands along the path here.
Yeah, so I the time I spent in the Army, I was fortunate enough to be able to participate in a lot of firsts. And so the one I just spoke of with 7th Infantry Division was a first because they were going through what they called a division certification. So in addition to spending a lot of time in the field, I got an opportunity to deploy to Egypt for what was called the Multinational Force and Observers Mission. It was the first time the 7th Infantry had performed that mission. If you recall, it was typically the 82nd and the 101st that did the rotation in and out of the Sinai Peninsula. And so, of course, we had the mishap that occurred where the 101st soldiers were lost in a plane crash. I think they were returning back from the deployment. So I was able to be a first. That was a first for me. I got to go and spend 6 months in the Sinai Desert, do an observer mission. And that was pretty enlightening. But what it did was it gave me an opportunity to then return back to my sister or my parent battalion, 6-8 Battalion, and do kind of those basic jobs that you do as a battery XO. And the highlights for me certainly went from every assignment that I had an opportunity to be around soldiers and be with the troops. So as a battery XO, that was just a fascinating thing because that was true leadership where you had an opportunity to work with senior non-commissioned officers in the form of platoon sergeants, first sergeants, and see how you trained and developed and shaped and got your platoon as a part of your battery ready for any type of deployment that you had to do in combat. I think probably the other most satisfying position that I had was then as a battery commander. And that was over in Korea as part of the 2nd Infantry Division, 1st to 15th, 1st to Fire Battalion. I served there for 2 years, first as a battalion FDO, fire direction officer, and then as a battery commander. And so I was a battery commander in Korea, which at the time was probably considered to be the one area where we thought that there was always that potential that something could tip off, right? Because, armistice was what existed
Right.
on the Korean Peninsula at the time. And it was just about the time or just prior to the kickoff of Desert Shield Desert Storm 1. But that's where I served, and so I enjoyed that. And then probably the icing on the cake was the last assignment that I did as the commanding general, 2-star commander. That was certainly the most fulfilling opportunity that I felt I had, and it was just so I was so gratified to have the opportunity, and the organization was so unique in that it was not a uniformed field organization. It was an organization largely made up of civilian scientists and engineers who were very, very extremely talented and extremely committed people to helping the Army improve their capability.
So let's talk about that command, the Combat Capabilities Development Command, and that was in I guess in Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. But now there's a transition that's going on, and it's becoming maybe being folded into the Futures Command, and they're building that big operation down in Austin, Texas. So tell us a little bit about that. What's going on there? Explain to the guys that have been disconnected for a little while, like me, kind of what's going on there. And again, I think I told you before, I participated in the analog Army, and now the Army is very much digital. You know, it surely has changed in 30 years. So let's talk a little bit about all of this.
Sure thing. So, the Army has always gone through periods of modernization. And this change, as was described by the Chief of Staff and Secretary of the Army at the time, Mark Milley, and Dr. Mark Esper, the Secretary of the Army at the time, was probably the most significant and the largest change that the Army had undergone since the standing up of TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command, probably 40 or 50 years ago. And so the Army has what are called Army Commands, which are 4-star organizations that are responsible for the running of the Army. So Army Materiel Command is responsible for the logistics and sustainment of the Army, and providing capabilities not only to the Army but to the Joint Force, as well, the ground component commanders in the Joint Force. And then TRADOC is responsible for training and leader development for the Army. And then Forces Command is obviously responsible for training and readiness of the Army, particularly the CONUS-based forces. So I think the leadership of the Army reasoned that over time we had kind of lost our way in terms of how we were modernizing our Army. A lot of the equipment that we have, although it has gone through generational upgrades, a lot of the equipment such as our artillery systems, our aviation platforms, our ground combat vehicles in the forms of our tanks and our infantry fighting vehicles, some of those platforms go all the way back to Vietnam era, and then certainly some of them go up to around the late 70s, early 80s when they were fielded in the Army. And they served us quite well during Desert 1 and Desert 2. But we found ourselves in some of our capabilities where we thought that our threats and some of our adversaries were starting to make advances that we had not made advances in. And ours was largely due to the focus that we had had for probably the prior 17 years, and that we were focused on counterinsurgency fights in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so to ensure that we weren't at a disadvantage, they saw the need to establish another 4-star command, one that was largely focused on modernization.
Right.
And so one of the anchor points for how the Army modernizes is centered around the research, development, and engineering that goes on in the Army and through the partnerships between the Army's labs and research, development, engineering centers and the defense industrial base, defense contractors, and the like. So they decided to create a 4-star command, which became Army Futures Command. And they also decided that one of the anchor points of this command would be moving an organization that I was in command of at the time, previously called Research, Development, and Engineering Command, or RDECOM, out of Army Materiel Command and into Army Futures Command. And that did, largely two things. Number one, it provided a foundation for Army Futures Command to be focused solely on modernization. And what it also did was it divested the role of research and development out of AMC, allowing them to focus primarily on logistics and sustainment for the Army. So that occurred back in 2018, I believe it was the standing up of Army Futures Command. And then the 4-star was named and came on board somewhere around October or November of 2018. And then we transitioned over in January of 2019, I believe it was. And then I stayed in command until November of 2019.
So you recently retired. You've caught your breath now. Been working very hard in retirement, but you're starting a new role on Monday, I understand. So tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing.
Yeah. So I like all of us old generals, you start to try to figure out what you want to do in your second act. And so after some discussions with my wife and my family, and thinking about whether or not I wanted to kind of take a step back permanently, or if I wanted to just take a step back to just kind of think about what I wanted to do next, I decided to just kind of pursue getting back out here and working. And typically what happens is a lot of us guys, we have the ability to go and be value added and work on the other side of government contracting to serve and still help provide capability to the Army. So I've taken on a position working for L3 Harris as one of their business development vice presidents.
So but in the meantime, you're working with two nonprofit organizations. One I'm very familiar with, and we'll come back to that one, but we've talked a little bit about a nonprofit that's headquartered in Southern California, and you've just joined the board of Great Minds in STEM. So let's tell everybody what STEM is that don't know, and then talk about what this particular organization seeks to do.
Okay, sure thing. So STEM is obviously science, technology, engineering, and math. And it's a acronym that centers around kind of promoting, steering young high school students as they pursue college education into the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. So going after those types of disciplines, getting majors, degrees, majoring in, are getting their bachelor's degree in a STEM-based field. And so Great Minds in STEM is focused on disadvantaged youth from various different communities. A large mix of them are probably from the Hispanic community, but they are really disadvantaged youth. And they advocate for educational opportunities, for internships, for opportunities post-graduation that they might be able to establish recruitment efforts to get young students into their first job, be it with industry, be it with government agencies, or be it with somewhere else in the civilian sector. So they really are partnered with not only colleges and universities at the academic level, but they're also partnering with small, medium, and large businesses to try to help promote and advance STEM educations for young people focused on underserved communities.
Yeah, so important, that the folks that are going to college sort of get a degree that has a market, and and there's just enormous value in an engineering degree or applied mathematics or one of the other disciplines. And I have a civil engineering degree. The one thing I wish I had more training in was psychology and communication, right? At this stage in my life. But that engineering degree has been a very sound foundation for a lot of the things that I've done over the years. And so so very important stuff. You're also working with a friend and colleague of ours, Sean Lanier, who has company Resolve Solutions. And Sean was a previous podcast guest on the Spotlight. Very interesting things that Sean is doing. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing with Resolve Solutions. You're coaching a little bit, I think.
Sure thing. Yeah. So, I see a lot of fire in, I call him E, but Sean Lanier. I see a lot of fire and a lot of
I need
passion.
to find out what the E stands for. I'm gonna call him up
I knew it. I knew it. I just can't think of his first name now, but I refer to him as E. That whole idea is kind of right in line with where I feel that I am in my life after 34 years of military, after being given an opportunity to go to a school like VMI, where were it not for that opportunity, I might not have ever gotten a college degree. And so I'm kind of at a point in my life where if I see an opportunity to try to help and give back, then I get inspired and I get interested in doing that.
Let me remind everybody what Resolve Solutions is doing. So they have been working with underserved students, but assisting them in securing primarily Army scholarships, but we'll be working with all of the branches and then helping them find the right college fit. So in addition to the fact that they've placed young people at the academies and the senior military colleges, they're also placing them at a whole host of colleges, historically black colleges and universities. And the interesting statistic is that, and I'll throw this one out there, the Army spends something in the neighborhood of $300 million a year on ROTC scholarships, but nationally only 52% of their scholarship students are graduating and commissioning. And Resolve Solutions has found the broken the code, if you will, and really has a high success rate. And so I love what Sean's doing, and I think you feel the same about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, 50% would be a pretty doggone shooting field goal percentage if we were talking about basketball. But when you think about the number of students that are afforded the opportunity to get a 4-year ride or close to a 4-year ride to college, and then only half of them actually succeed. They actually come through the pipeline and enter out into the workforce out of the pipeline. That is probably a number that we can do a lot better on. And I think that's what drives Sean's passion. The other thing
he's demonstrating some success too. And I mean, and some of the numbers are even worse. I mean, you look at the minority and underserved communities, and I think the success rate there was in the 33% range, right? And so now here Resolve Solutions been only getting out of the gate, but I think they put about 100 students in scholarships this fall. And, they're hitting numbers at VMI 83%. Graduation and commissioning rate, and then at the historically black colleges and universities, he's got the numbers up into the 60s and 70% range. I mean, that's outstanding. And then you talk about the lifetime earning value of an individual that succeeds coming through that program. You've created a great citizen in addition to, I love what they're doing.
Well, the other thing about it, I would tell you, Bob, is a lot of kids in underserved communities, um, they have this view of what it means to do military service or to do selfless service, right? And a lot of times they don't have an appreciation of the opportunities that it provides for them. Okay, so I'm kind of a living, breathing example of a person who did not really know, even though I had a father who had served in the military. But then once I got into the military and I started thinking about all the opportunities that were being presented before me, right? And all the people that over the course of my 34 years I had the opportunity to interact with and meet, and how they were able to essentially elevate themselves to a level of success and a level of a more brighter future for themselves, for their kids, as a result of having just kind of decided that, hey, you know what? This thing of military service is something that I am good at. It's something that I can excel at, and it's something that I feel like I'm doing a whole lot for the nation. And a lot of kids miss that. A lot of athletes miss that. I had an opportunity to speak about a month or two ago to some VMI alumni who are part of the Pramaji Area Impact, PAI. And I just wanted to leave them with the thought that a lot of there is such a strong linkage between being an athlete and competitive sports, right? And then going and doing military service, okay? Team building, camaraderie, esprit de corps, competition, everybody working to lift each other up, right, for the greater good. I mean, these are all some of the things that come out of not only the sports arena, but also military service. Not to mention the other things that are fundamental to VMI, about loyalty, duty, selfless service, courage, commitment, candor, honor, selfless sacrifice, all of those things.
Interesting stuff. So, I've asked the question. I had Darren Mcdew on. I don't know if I imagine you know Darren,
I do.
and pose this question to him. We've got kind of a divided nation right now. We've got some real issues to wrestle with. How's the military doing that? What can we learn from this in the service, and vice versa? I'll throw it back. What can the military do better also right now with this where we are in this country?
Yeah, I would tell you that probably the military, and I would probably go so far as to say all branches of the military. One of the good things about having served and been in the military is you realize how introspective or how self-critical the military can be, right? Because they understand that their challenge is about solving problems that sometimes matter in terms of life and death. And success in a military operation, certainly there's life and death, and it can have serious consequences if you fail to obtain your objective. So they're very, very inward looking to find where their weaknesses are. And so the military obviously knows, and I think you've heard a lot of their leaders say it, they know that they've got work to do. But I think that they are probably far more ahead in terms of looking at and striving for diversity in their ranks. And that's certainly reflected in the numbers of the enlisted ranks within their non-commissioned officers, particularly amongst the senior non-commissioned officers, and then in the various different stratifications of senior officer ranks. It is important. I've experienced it during my probably 8 years as a flag officer. It's important when you go to different places and you meet people and they tell you, they tell you, hey, you're the first that I've ever seen wearing the uniform with stars on your chest, right? And you hear that not only from young soldiers, right? I used to hear it from people as I was walking through the airports. I would hear it when I went to restaurants, if I was in a uniform, if I met with congressional leaders, the whole 9 yards. I mean, if you want to be reflective of society and you want to have something that allows young people to aspire to, then they've got to see it in the form of role models, either near or distant to them. Because if they see it, then they believe they can achieve it. And if you can inspire and motivate them that they can, then, the country certainly would be a lot better off.
A few years ago, I had I wrote a piece and I called it Vision 2020. And at that point in time, I was suggesting that we needed more military veterans in politics, in Congress. The number after World War II, I think 70% of our Congress members had some form of military experience, and it dipped to about 18%.
Yeah.
And, I think we need more leadership and less politics, if you understand my just respond to this. I think that, we need some adult problem solving, whatever side of the issues you're on. And we need to communicate in the constructive manner that we did in the military. You messed this up. I'm not trying to personally ruin you. I want you and the team to get better, right? Let's talk a little bit about that, and then unfortunately we were sort of running out of time.
Yeah. So, I think you're right. I think, leadership is required to solve problems, is the first thing I would say. What I personally observe, just as Cedric Wins, is that leadership needs to come about in more of a collaborative fashion. It needs to come about as a result of being committed to solving problems, right? It can't be the result of personal attacks. It's not effective. It can be, but it's not effective. If it's that you stay rooted and wedged to your positions just for the sake of whatever, party affiliation. If you're trying to do right by the majority of the people in American society, then I think a lot of times if you center your leadership around that, that's what drives you. That's what motivates you to say, hey, I recognize there's a problem in our society that deals with whatever. Let's just say for practical purposes and current events that deals with systemic racism. Well, first you're going to acknowledge it, and then you're going to probably say, okay, if I'm not an expert in this, then I need to bring some voices to the table who can help articulate the various different viewpoints, right? And then I'm going to, along with that group of folks, start thinking about what are some of the resolutions, what are some of the solutions that are realistic and achievable, and how do we set ourselves on a path to do and achieve those things, and how do we monitor and watch our progress. And so to me, that's kind of things that from day one in the military, I've been taught. And I think that if we had more people in the circles of Congress, in other areas, that had that mindset and had that appreciation and also had that experience, right? Because you know how to solve problems if you've had to solve problems, right? You know how to give and take if you've had to give and take. You know how to put your views of how something might be to your advantage. You know how to put that aside if you've ever served selflessly. I'm sorry. If you've ever served selflessly and had to put your own personal desires to the back and allow what's good for the whole to come to the forefront. If you've experienced those things and seen the success that comes about as a result of those things, then when these problems come at you on a local or national scale, you know how to do it. And so I think you're right that if we had more people who had those experiences, whether it was military, whether it was working in some other type of government agency, but people who've been problem solvers, result getters, I think we would probably be making a lot more progress.
One final question. In the course of your career, did you have a mentor or someone that you looked to that you sort of modeled yourself after or aspired to be like?
Yeah, probably. I had several people that I probably watched and observed. I would not say that they were. I was the worst when it came to truly going to somebody and establishing a mentor-mentee relationship. I was the worst. But one thing I was always fairly good at was watching people and really connecting to people who I saw some very, very strong leadership skills or those types of talents. So the first one I tell you is the guy you mentioned, which was Darren Mcdew. So Darren Mcdew was in the room that I had. I was a dyke in. I had Darren Mcdew, I had Joey Keys, I had Jerome Williams, who was my dyke, and then Darryl Horn. Well, you know, that collective group of four guys were always guys that you could look out to and model good habits and take good habits from. I've had
God bless Daryl and Jerry too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I had several throughout my Army career. I was fortunate enough at a very, very early stage in my career to get my first assignment in the Pentagon as a senior captain, junior major. And it was fascinating to me because, number one, there wasn't a whole bunch of captains walking around the Pentagon when I was there. There were only a few. And I got to interact on a daily basis with 2, 3, sometimes 4-star generals, and the best ones, because I've seen some of all different shades and types. From the very, very toxic ones, the very loud, bombastic ones, to the very, very measured ones. And by far, the best ones that I experienced were the ones that, as a young action officer, staff officer, wanted to bring you into an environment, and they knew you were the expert, and they needed just enough information from you so that they could go out and be effective for the Army. And so they like to set the conditions. You'd come in to brief them, and they would come in and they like to set the conditions where you felt comfortable, okay, so that the expertise that you had in your head and you had prepped for, you could give it all to them. And so when I first witnessed that from a couple of colonels and 2-star generals who would eventually become 4-star generals, that was what I took away from each and every one of those engagements. And that was what I tried to do as I became a senior officer, was try to set the conditions in the room. And if you watch people, you see them come in the room and you can tell they're nervous, right? They're nervous because you got stars on your chest. They're nervous because you're in this big office on the E-ring, whatever the case may be. And if you set the conditions where they can come in and feel comfortable, and you can get the person who's most likely to talk to engage, that's easy. But get the person who's least likely to talk to engage and hear what they have to say and hear what they know. And that pays huge dividends. And so that was one of the things that I learned, probably the most important thing that I learned over my 34 years.
Great lesson. Well, thank you so much. We've been listening to and speaking with Major General Cedric Wins, U.S. Army, retired, VMI class of 1985, and just a great stellar career in the United States Army, and now working on his civilian career and his nonprofit support. Something tells me that you're going to end up mentoring some young people here. So you've got that opportunity to be the mentor now. You've been listening to the Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network. We try to post these things on Tuesdays and Fridays, and we feature veterans and military spouses who are making an impact in our community. Very pleased to have you, Major General Wins, on the program. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Bob, and I really enjoyed it, and look forward to talking to you again sometime.
Very well, and that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Spotlight by Veteran Crowd. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and uploads, please visit our website at veterancrowdnetwork.com. We'll see you next time.